Ivar was the last full Norse king of the city-state of Luimneach. This guy was an absolute disaster for the likes of Brian Boru's family growing up. Bertie Brosnan here of Bertie Brosnan Films, and I'm starting a series on Brian Boru, his life, his career, his rise to power, all the way to the Battle of Clontarf. And actually, I'm going to go beyond that in another series as well. This is inspired by the live stream I did with Irish medieval history. I'm very grateful to Philip for getting in touch. And also, I have actually had requests for this as well. Not a huge amount of requests, but some. It makes sense because what I'm doing with my channels is really beginning this mission into Invasion Island, which is my brand that is all centered around Irish mythology, history, and folklore, and the stories that come from that time in Ireland, those times in Ireland. But the way I'm kind of going about it is starting obviously with the Forgotten Prince, which I'll talk about later on, where that kind of all starts at the Battle of Clontarf and goes beyond. But I do have plans to go back and do books on Brian Boru. But now is a good time for me to talk about the actual life and career from my own research, and I've delved deep into the research of Brian Boru. And one of the main academics that I use as a huge reference is Sean Duffy of Trinity College. Now, I don't just use him. I actually have several main sources or main people that I look to for inspiration and for references, etc. But in general, Sean Duffy seems to be the number one person that I agree with. Obviously, there's a lot more people out there like Irish medieval history, clans and dynasties. They're big channels that I actually look up to as well in terms of their research and what they're doing in the Irish history space. Let's get into this series. What's this series going to be? It's going to be videos where I go through the life of Brian Boru. Now, I'm going to go in depth into this. So I'm going to actually talk about the characters around Brian Boru from birth and actually tell some stories around those times, and also give the overview about how this all came about, because from the live stream, and I'm going to leave the live stream in the description as well, and also we're doing a follow-up live stream. This video could very well be seen when that live stream is available, so both live streams will be available and further ones. These are all centered around Brian Boru with Irish medieval history, so they will be in the description depending on when this gets out. The problem that we have with Irish history, mythology and folklore, especially Irish history of course, is that we have this oversimplified version of it from a lot of people. We also have the problem of the romanticization. It probably happens with every history. The mythologization as well of certain stories, and also the folklore element to our stories as well that needs to be dispelled a little bit, because yes, we have folklore, but there's a lot of folklore in the history as well. I am going to talk about some of the tales of Brian Boru, which are probably made up, to be honest, but that's not to say they don't actually have significance, because they do tell us, they give us clues as to certain elements of their lifestyle. The oversimplification, the kind of misconceptions, the kind of romanticization of the story of Brian Boru, this is all going to be about trying to dispel and trying to bring everything into the light in terms of an academic view of it. Now, when I say an academic view, I'm not an academic, right? But I study the academics. Claire Downham is another example of an unbelievable academic. I have a lot of her papers downloaded. Roger Chatterton Newman's another example. Seamus McManus, even though that's more of a broad view of Irish history. I like Morgan Llewellyn's works in the space as well, because she's done something very brilliant for Irish history, that she brought it all to light in terms of the stories. Now, obviously, a lot of these people can be a little bit dated and stuff. Certainly not Sean Duffy. But there are other people that are a little bit dated. We have to be careful of that. One book that I recommend anybody to get is Sean Duffy's Brian Boru and the Battle of Clontarf. All my sources will be actually in the description, and also as well, if you look at my other videos on Brian Boru, you'll see there's a significant amount of sources mentioned in the description if you want to check them out. My most recent video, as of this video, Brian Boru's Last Stand and Why Clontarf Still Matters. When I'm recording this is Easter week 2025. When Brian Boru, the Battle of Clontarf actually happened was April 23rd in 1014. We're actually doing a live stream on that night. Now, as I said, you might be watching this video at the time when this is already released. So if you are watching it then, go into the description, check out the live stream. That's going to be live stream from where I'm right now with Irish Medieval History. This is exciting for me. It's going to be my first time doing a proper live stream on my channel. So it's exciting stuff. Anyway, let's get into this because that's the overview. That's the introduction to all of this. Brian Boru was born in the area of Killaloe, the townland of Killaloe as we know it today in County Clare, right on the border of Tipperary. It's actually a place called Gael Borúma at the Loch Derg mouth, which is the River Shannon leading into Loch Derg. So this fort is highly impressive. I've been there twice. Both times I had a spiritual experience because I just felt such power there. Where he was born, and the consensus is that he was born in this fort, at this fort. This was the place of the Dalcassians, the Dalcassian power base, the Dalcash. I'll talk about the name and how that came into being later on through his father, Kinetic Mac Lorcan, and that was his father. So Brian Boru was born Brian Mac Kinetic. So Brian Mac Kennedy, essentially in an anglicized version. His name Borúma would come later on, posthumously added to him. We'll talk about that later on. But where he was born would definitely be significant in the story of Brian Boru, because this location was a blessing and potentially a curse for his youth, because the Vikings of Limerick, right, were very much active in this area. It's literally a stone throws from Limerick in terms of a boat, like a Viking longship. Now, when I refer to Vikings, let's just be clear about this. When I'm saying Vikings, I'm talking about the Norse Gael, the Norse, the Danish, and the activity of Vikinger. So when they're going Vikinger, they're going Viking was them going raiding, assaulting, pillaging, attacking, stealing, all this kind of stuff. And this is what I refer to as the Vikings, right? Now, we refer to them as well because in this way, because it's just simplified way for the general audience. At this point in Brian's life, there's one true Norse Viking king of Limerick. That is Ivar of Limerick, a true Norse Viking. I believe his sons may have been full Viking as well. If not, they were definitely Norse Gael. Ivar was the last full Norse king of the city-state of Luimneach. And this guy was an absolute disaster for the likes of Brian Boru's family growing up. I need to talk a little bit about the Dalcassians, the Kinetic Mac Lorcan's family. They were cattle lords. A lot of theories would talk about Borúma being of the cattle tribute, being of the cattle or cattle counting. There are different theories to this. A lot of it is down to their location, Gael Borúma. Now, would someone say that's because it's of cattle counting? But not necessarily the case, because there was a poem written of Borúma. Now, this is a theory to say that it's actually a place name rather than the actual cattle counting. Now, it may well be born out of the cattle counting thing, but the point is that maybe Brian Borúma was because of where he was born versus the cattle thing. Now, there's another theory to this as well, that the Boru tribute was brought back by Boru as well, which was a kind of a controversial thing later on in his life. It was a tribute by the High King to bring in, massive amounts of cattle from the provincial kings and stuff like that. Now, we'll get into that at another time. So this wasn't his name growing up. This was added in after his life. Maybe towards the end of his life, he was starting to be known as this. Probably after his life. He grew up as Brian Mac Kinetic. When you visit the town of Killaloe, and hopefully you do, because I have, it is an unbelievable place because it leaves a lot of clues to Brian Boru's existence. Of course, there's King Cora. but the palace is not there anymore, but there's a big church there now, so you can kind of imagine that being the palace. St. Louis Monastery was brought up from the river. It's a long story. There's something to do with the Shannon works, hydro works or something, and the river flooded and they had to move the monastery up, so it's actually on the lands of St. Flannan's Church. Also down the hill you got there's a well where Murragh was baptized. That's his son that will come later on. He was baptized. Also in the other churches you got little clues to Brian Boru's reign, or he's at the aftermath of his reign. The point is, when you go to Killaloe, you have a lot to visit, a lot to look at, and a lot to imagine about Brian Boru's life, especially Gael Borúma. Of course, there's Cragley up in the hills there, and there's certain other sites around that you can visit as well. His family claimed to be of the Oanachta right back, but really who they were was the Desh Tushkart. So they were of the northern Deshi. The Deshi tribe was a huge tribe of lesser noble class of Irish, going all the way over to Waterford, right over to Tipperary and Clare, the Deshi. So he was of the Deshi Tushkart, the northern Deshi. And this is what they were kind of known as until they were referred to as the Dalcash around Kinetic's time, because this was all about getting legitimacy for the push for kingship later on. Now, people often use this as an argument against Brian Boru because they say, oh, he was usurping and fiddling the books for kingship and stuff, as if other families weren't doing these kind of things, like as if anywhere in the world that this didn't happen. This was happening all over the place. I mean, fiddling the books is still happening today for all sorts of reasons. So it's not like they were doing anything majorly different. Like, it's just, that's just what they were doing, you know. The Dalcash came into existence because they, and Duffy even says this, that they would kind of claim to be a descendant of Dalcash, and that's where they get their ancestry from. And this is some, very important figure of the past. They say that maybe it's not true, but this is where they get their name from. You have to remember, this was all to do with the kingship of the land. So when you're a king, economically, politically, for strength reasons, for the happiness of your people, to show that you are progressing and that you're expanding, you need to start doing things where you're looking to other territory. Irish medieval history is very good talking about these things like cattle raiding and stuff like that. This was all seasonal stuff. This was all a part of life. This was all a part of the system of medieval Ireland. There was all these things going on that we just don't really know about, that we don't understand. So this wasn't like some sort of weird thing where you're going into other people's territory, taking hostages, something I'll get on later on, cattle raiding and stuff like that. It's actually a part of regular life there. So this kind of stuff where they were trying to legitimize their claim to the throne, this was all because the Oanachtas were the provincial kings of Munster, and they had a traditional kind of claim to it. Who's to know that that's legitimate? I think a lot of it's like, it's like modern day contracts and stuff like that. It's modern day things. Like, you can kind of set up a couple of, offshore accounts and set up a couple of dummy companies, and, you're a legitimate business, medieval white collar crime or whatever, white collar stuff, And this, I'm not trying to say, oh, this was all perfectly fine and there's no morality or anything like that. I'm just saying that we need to look at these things without judging it too much, because if you're judging it too much, you're looking at a time 1,000 years ago. Like, I mean, how can you judge it that much? Because it was what it was. Like, it happened and it's over. We're just looking at it now through an analyst's eyes and trying to make sense of it all. And it's cool. We watch Game of Thrones, we watch Vikings. It's goddamn cool. Like, it's actually class when you really figure out about Irish medieval history, when you actually look into what was going on. It's cool. Game of Thrones, but it's Irish style. What will become very apparent, and this is where we're going to finish today's episode, is that Kinetic, his father, started making some power moves and started making some decisions that will echo into Brian's life, because Brian would start echoing his actions would start echoing his father's and his older brothers and stuff like that, as you can see later on when we get into that. This is going to be a long enough series, so I hope you stay tuned and make sure you subscribe, hit the notification bell, sign up to my email list as well in the description, because I'm going to send out an email newsletter every time an episode comes out. But the main thing you can do is notification bell, leave a comment and like, and watch till the end, because If you do that, the algorithm will show you more so as well. Like, you won't get lost. This stuff won't get lost on you. But Cédric MacLorcan, Brian's father, he started making some power moves before Brian was even born. So there was the king of the Dalcash before him was actually an abbot as well as a king, which was kind of unusual, but it wasn't outside of the realms of possibilities. And it goes to show you how the church, the political machinations were already in play here. We can see later on that Brian Boru certainly was a kind of a Irish Charlemagne, and as Irish medieval history put it in the live stream, a kind of a Renaissance man, which was a wonderful way of putting it. Credit to him for that. But to be honest with you, I have read in several places about the Charlemagne-esque vibe of Brian Boru. So according to Sean Duffy, some treachery unfolded as the previous Dalcash king, Rebecca Mac Matla, died, who was abbot of Tuamgraney and a king. His son was to succeed, but he was killed by one of his 4 siblings, Brian's father and uncles. Cédric took the helm and consolidated power from there on in. Cédric was already married to Brian's mother, Babine, and Princess of Connacht, a definite political marriage. But he had more than one wife, but we know nothing of the others. So this is where I'm going to end the episode today. This is kind of an introduction. I didn't want to get too in depth, but I wanted to give you an overview of where we're standing. I want to kind of conclude this by just talking about briefly what we've covered today. And I actually didn't say this in the beginning. It was 941 AD when Brian was born. We're going to get into this in the next episode, but something tragic actually happened in Brian's life in the same year he was born. So make sure you're subscribed for episode 2 of this series, and you're going to find out what that was. But Brian was born 941 AD into a very turbulent time, but into a clan that was on the rise, a dynastic group that was on the rise, that was making its kind of name known to the Oanachtas and to the High King of Ireland, and we'll get into that in episode 2. And Brian was kind of being formed by these tragic events, by these new events, these unfoldings for his tribe. He was in a place where it was at the mouth of the highway of Ireland, the River Shannon, leading up all the way up through the country. I didn't mention that before, all the way up to Northern Ireland. So this was a very powerful place. They were cattle lords. They became wealthy from this. They started making a name for themselves. Then they started actually gathering resources and actually trying to get the legalities of their claims for kingship, whether they be true or not, in place. So there was definite movement, definite ambition, and definite power stuff going on. Now, in the next episode, I'm going to cover what happened in Brian Boru's life when he was just born, and we're going to get into some of the relationships that Cédric had with the High King of Ireland and how it all started playing out. Because something that I didn't mention that I will mention is that Brian had 11 brothers, half-brothers, a lot of them, and some of them were already killed, which I'll get into soon enough. Also, if you're interested, I got some merch, Brian Boru merch. If you use the discount code YouTubeBertie because you've watched this video, you will get 10% off. And actually all the links are in my description. If you want to buy the book, The Forgotten Prince, you can get a copy today. There may be a discount on at the moment. I'm not 100% sure. It depends when you're watching this, but hopefully there is. There definitely is going to be a discount for the month of half of April and the month of May 2025. Also, I do have signed copies available. There's a waiting list for them. If you want one and you're absolutely 100% certain you want one, these cost more than the regular copies, almost twice as much, because they have to be sent to me and then sent to you. So the postage is quite a lot. But I've gotten such great feedback for these. You get a personalized note, bookmark, and a signed copy sent to you. You just send me one payment and everything is done for you, and you get it into your letterbox. And you have that for life, a signed copy. I'm not going to be doing that forever, by the way. So if people get on it, get to be the first 100, maybe I'll stop after 100. Thank you so much for watching. All my links are in the description. You can also make a contribution by PayPal, Stripe, Buy Me a Coffee. All of this helps Bertie Brosnan Films grow. If you're interested in working with me, partnering with me, get in touch with me, Bertie@BertieBrosnanFilms.com. All the links are at BertieBrosnanFilms.com. The links are in the description. And actually, the best comment on this video is going to get pinned as well. So for anybody interested in YouTube membership, there actually are memberships as well, where I answer every single comment, and videos like this get released to them 24 hours in advance, and you get badges and you get all that sort of stuff as well. Thank you so much for listening. Take care. God bless. Talk to you soon.